Welcome back to another episode of Gatehouse Insights. This morning, I'm joined by Nadia Grech, who is an accredited specialist in personal injury law. Nadia is going to shed some light on the topics of how she transitioned from one career to law, the accredited specialisation course, setting up a Sydney firm in Melbourne, and the rewards of being able to establish a new firm in the Melbourne market. Make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel to catch it all. So I wanted to begin with, I suppose, what motivated you to get into law, because you were a chiropractor beforehand.
Yeah, and I was a chiropractor beforehand for many years, for 14 years, with some clinical years in that. I had always had a really good sense of right and wrong, and I guess those values were instilled from a really young age. I grew up in a really strict Italian family, and we always had a sense of what was right and what was wrong, and it was just a burning desire for me to explore that. I didn't feel I was exploring that whilst being a chiropractor, and I was getting to the stage, well, it was towards the end of my study. It was a 5-year double bachelor degree as a chiropractor, and I just knew that my hands were already starting to hurt, so I needed to look at other vocations or other professions that would allow me to perhaps explore a longer working life for myself. And it just felt like law seemed to be that burning desire that I always wanted to do. Yeah.
How did you find the transition from, I suppose, that type of work to law?
Well, for me, it wasn't a black and white transition. There was a long grey period where I'd be practicing chiropractic part-time and practicing law part-time. And I was fortunate to have jobs that allowed me to work part-time, which meant that by the end of the week, I was working 6 days a week full-time. So for me, there were many years where I worked in both professions, and it was really difficult, but I couldn't just cold turkey stop chiropractic, and I really still loved it, and I still do love it now. But ultimately, the change happened when I had children, and I knew that I really couldn't do it all. And I was knocking back really great legal opportunities. And I guess I came to a point in my life where I knew I really needed to say goodbye to my first profession, which was that of a chiropractor. Yeah.
How did you, I suppose, find your first job in law?
For me, I always knew when I was studying law what type of law I wanted to do. And that's a little bit unusual, perhaps. I always knew I wanted to do personal injury because I have a love for anatomy and human body, and I just thought it would gel so well with chiropractic. So for me, my first job was exciting because people would come to me, and I was so junior, and asking me, "Oh, Nadia, what does this x-ray mean?" or "What does this word mean?" And I really, I was really fortunate to have great bosses initially who really valued that. And it just really kept exciting me to keep going in the law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose, do you have advice for people that are not in the law at the moment, but they're thinking of making that change to law?
I do. It's certainly not a decision you can make lightly. You can't wake up and say, I'm going to study law. For me, it was, how am I going to study whilst working? And the realities of life are that we do need to work, or some of us need to work, because we have expenses and whatever else. So for me, it was about finding a course in my local area, so in Melbourne, where I could study perhaps after hours or do weekend courses. And at the time, Monash University really fit the bill for me because they allowed people to work and do their study within the city. So my advice is really look into the university you want to study law at, and blend into their culture and see if that aligns with yours. Obviously look at the fees and how you're going to pay for that. Do your research is really what I think you should be doing, and also talking to people in the industry to see if it's a job that you really can see yourself doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah.
So you've recently also completed your accredited specialisation, and you got your certificate last November.
Yes.
What's, I suppose, for those lawyers wanting to look at studying in that or doing their accredited specialist, what do they need to know to succeed and pass the exams?
Look, when you decide to do the accreditation, you really need to be committed to that decision. It's not just a financial, you do have to pay to do your accreditation, and if you're lucky enough to have a firm that pays for that, that's great. But it's a commitment, and the fail rate is high. Not many of us pass, and I truly think you've got to commit to that decision, because that commitment means allowing yourself time to study. I don't think it's an exam that you can just wing. I do think you need to put in a lot of hours to pass that exam, and the rewards are remarkable once you do pass it. For me, I needed to talk to my family, because if they could not support me, in minding the children every weekend, there was no way I could have done it without their support. So have a great support structure around you, and check in with your law firm or your legal practice to see if they're going to allow you to have some study time to perhaps take a week off before the examination. But you need to commit to it, because, when you do the exam, you hopefully want to pass it. Yeah.
How many hours did you put in, I suppose, each week, and how many weeks?
Look, a lot. I committed late to the decision to want to do it last year, because personal injury examination is every second year. I think I was a late entry, and I asked the LIV if that was allowed, and it was okay. The amount of hours, so it's probably 13 weeks prior to the examination. I wouldn't do anything during the week, because I ran a really busy legal practice, but every Saturday and Sunday I would study at the Melbourne Uni Law Library from about 10 till 5, but solid blocks, which meant that I could have breakfast with the children, and then go home and feel like I was social with my husband and partner. And so initially every weekend, and then 2 weeks before the examination, it was every night until about midnight. Okay. And I'm really honest when I tell people that, because I did study for it, but I did pass it. So another important thing is I did many practice exams under strict exam-like environment. So it was 3 hours. I committed to 3 hours every morning. Then I'd go for a break, and then I'd keep studying.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were very fortunate to have your family take care of children over the weekends.
It wasn't easy. It really meant that my husband really needed to understand that I needed this time, and it was a short period, and he was wonderful. So,
that's good. For those that, so if you didn't have that support network, would you have done it?
I think for me, I knew I needed to study, and I don't honestly think I could have done it. But bearing in mind, I do have 2 little children under 6, so you need a support network. I guess if you don't have the family support network, what I relied on also were my colleagues in the area. So we formed a study group, and they were sensational. Yeah. And that was probably integral to us passing as well.
Yeah. I was going to ask about, did you form study groups to help you get through? Yeah.
Yes. And it's always a nerve-wracking thing to form a study group, because I didn't know the majority of our study group. And I've been in personal injury for many years. And for me, it meant it expanded my horizons with people and networking, and we've formed a beautiful friendship group out of it that we go for drinks and dinners. But we also have a Snapchat where we rely on each other now. So whenever we've got a problem, we can just Snapchat the group and we get an answer. So they've been, it turned out that we were all women, so they were a wonderful group of, we all supported each other. Yeah. Yeah, and
That's
I highly recommend it. Yeah, highly recommend it.
So now you've also obviously setting up a firm, a Sydney firm in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Tell us about, I suppose, some of the challenges you've had to deal with, and how have you pushed through those challenges?
I really had challenges from the get-go from some of my peers saying or telling me it's never going to work, Sydney firms shouldn't be, impacting in the Melbourne market. And I heard it all, and I really blocked out a lot of that negativity, so that even prior to doing what we've done. The important thing about Carroll and O'Dea being a really big New South Wales firm is that they'd always had clients in Melbourne. So it only seemed fitting to open up an office in Melbourne to help service those clients, but also to develop our personal injury arm of the business. Major challenges for me were I was on my own. So I'd gone from a massive firm and then I was starting up the Sydney branch in Melbourne. And so I didn't really have colleagues to bounce ideas off, however little or however big or however hard they were. So that was really challenging for me. But at the same time, I was blessed with having a really supportive firm and a model that worked in Sydney that I could mould into the Melbourne market. So I do get a lot of support from, my team in Sydney.
Yeah.
Another big challenge for me was explaining the way costs work in Victoria. And once I'd explained that to my bosses and my partners, they've been really on board with that. So the first thing I organised was a really robust conditional cost agreement, and I was really big on that. And I think you've got to have that settled before you even open up, the firm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. What are the differences between costs between Victoria and Sydney?
They look similar but different, and I guess the way we charge from a personal injury perspective is different from the Sydney model with our fixed cost regime. So it was explaining that to the partners, but they totally get it now. And I think it was important for them to have someone, really bring Melbourne alive with a person that could network with, whether it be a stakeholder or a cost assessor. And that was really important to opening up Melbourne. Yeah.
And so I suppose there's always challenges, but what have been some of the rewards?
I think they've been, it's definitely been hard. It hasn't always been rosy, and I'm the first to say that. But for me personally, it's been quite rewarding bringing to light my business skills once again, because I did have 2 chiropractic clinics and I was a businesswoman in my own right. For me, running a legal practice has really expanded that business aspect that I've always really loved as well. When I reflect upon my time already at Carroll O'Dea, it's really important to do that, because then I realised, how far I've really come and how many clients we've got now, and just how the office has evolved. So that's been very, very rewarding. And I think as a woman in the law, it's been rather rewarding having done this and done it on my own in a market where I respect so many of my male counterparts who are so much more experienced than what I am, but have equally respected me for what I've done. There's always going to be someone who's brighter and more experienced than what you are, but it's about having that confidence. And I've really seen that evolve in opening up and extending the Carroll O'Dea brand into Melbourne.
Have there been any, I suppose, business skills that you learnt in your chiropractic clinics that you've been able to bring over to law that's quite unique, that no one would ever do?
I don't know if they're quite unique, but I certainly have an understanding of office space and how much an office costs a business, and if you're going to put on a staff member, how much does that cost the business, and what do you need to bring in to cover those costs, and then wages. So I really have a good sense of what that's about, but equally so really understanding people and bringing in the right clientele, which is very similar to chiropractic. You want to be treating people that really respect what you do, and also knowing when not to take on a client is equally a skill that I've had to use in both professions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. For people wanting to start their own legal practice, what should they know?
Look, I've been fortunate to. It feels like I have opened up my own business, but it's not. It's Carroll O'Dea, and we work really, really well together. But if you're going to open up your own business, and it's certainly something I've thought about, I've had this wonderful opportunity, so it's probably something I won't do. But I think IT is a massive consideration before you even take on your first client. I think if you're opening up your own law firm, you need a good file management system. I think gone are the days where you could open up a suburban legal law firm and just with a pen and paper and a client. I mean, you can still do that, but I think the way of the legal or the Australian legal industry is that you need good IT. with a file management system, but you also need the infrastructure behind that. So you need to know how you're going to store lots of information. I think we're moving to a paperless society, in particular in the law. The courts are already leading by example. So that's the first thing, investing in a good IT structure. And along with that is all the stuff that sits behind it, making sure your lawyers have got remote access to the office. So a laptop, it's simple things like this, or a mobile phone that you can Wi-Fi or hotspot off. I think I've mentioned, I think having a really robust conditional cost agreement or cost agreement is certainly something that's really important, having it looked at by a cost barrister. And I think thirdly, you do need confidence, because there are going to be people who are going to want to knock you off your block, and not being overly confident, because that's a different set of circumstances. It's just having confidence in what you do and what you offer clients, and that genuineness, the genuine confidence that you can use with clients. So that's my advice.
And there you have it. Another episode of Gatehouse Insights draws to an end. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this video with your friends. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel, where you can see more.